Hello, everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so maybe we can start our meeting this afternoon. Thank you for joining online, and I'm happy that non-members are also joining this session. Maybe they will know better of Uecna's work. We will have plenty of time for question and discussions after presentation. But for the time being, I think we should hear our speakers about campaigning and their successful campaigns, or maybe less successful. Eleftheria, will you present the two speakers of this afternoon?
Today we will have two speakers talking about certain matters. Our first speaker will be Mr. Florian Sperk, and he would be followed by our Vice Chair, John Stewart. You all know John. John was chair of the HACAN, the organization which gave a voice to the communities impacted by Heathrow for 20 years. He played a central role in defeating plans for the third runway at the airport in 2010. Prior to that, he was a key figure in defeating plans for major highways and motorways in the UK in the 80s and 90s. But first, we will hear from Florian Sperk. And Florian runs his own business, which is specializes in co-working and web marketing. He played a central role in the campaign to defeat the third runway at Munich airport. He also was a key organizer of anti-nuclear campaigns. He will draw lessons from both campaigns. So, Mr. Sperk, the floor is on you.
Thank you very much. Okay. I'll quickly share my screen. Hope you can see it now.
Okay.
Do you have it?
Yes, we can see.
You can see it. So when John called me and asked me to do a little session on successful campaigning, I imagined that many people of you feel themselves in a way of a trapped situation in this, to figure it out literally in this David against Goliath situation, where you have an overcoming threat against your community, your way of life, your liberty, maybe the environment you're living in. And so I tried to go with this picture and talk a little bit about the campaigning, but also about the mindset that this picture pushes on you, and how to reflect on this demanding situation. So I hope I can just go. Yeah. So as a short overview, we talk about this emotional thing, David against Goliath, then a little bit about the runway. We will have plenty of time to go into details here, which actions we took, how we did what. And then I think it's important to also stress the anti-nuclear protests in Germany, because they have quite a similarity to what the big picture in 2022 and the following years might be with the aviation campaigning in Europe. And then I have some literature for you as a special gift for an end of this whole session with me. So how to David in a modern liberal democracy. And what you see is my ridiculous skills in photoshopping things. But what you should stress, of course, is that this David, he doesn't have a slingshot anymore. He has a way of addressing certain issues, certain arguments. And I took this picture from Hobbes' Leviathan, to give you an idea that this overcoming threat that you might feel in your life is certainly something different to this picture of the Goliath. It is a modern liberal democracy that we are all in and that we have to address. And this is quite a different kind of struggle than this original picture is, because this overcoming force in your life, it is set together by many, many people, and it is, of course, something that you can address easily and that you don't have to fight power with power, but with arguments. So, and here I put you what I think has proven to be the main issues in all successful campaigns that I did. I did not only Third Runway and nuclear, but also a campaign against Olympic Games, Winter Olympic Games, and also campaigning for the Green Party and different smaller campaigns, something like a fracking campaign and stuff like that. So I think in all the cases, the most important thing that you should have ready is to have the better arguments. I can't stress this enough, but it is most important to really go after the arguments, which is quite difficult sometimes, that you get experts, that you get especially economic experts that can prove your point. But this is something that you always have to have. Otherwise, if you don't have the arguments that go for the bigger picture, that go for the public interest, that are, of a way universal for everyone to address to, then you will not be able to build alliances and you will not get the media attention, because the media needs these backgrounds of the better argument. So if you have these three things, like building alliances with different local groups, the churches, the environmental groups, some public parties, maybe some groups that are completely out of your mind, like Pathfinders or whatever, sport clubs, it can be very, very different. All these people, you can address them with the better argument. So the better argument is mostly about money. It's mostly about what is healthy. It's about human rights. It's about these issues. And if you have them ready, you can go after it. Of course, the media are important, but the media, they need certain hooks. They need pictures, they need stories, they need some sympathetic people. But all this won't really grab deeper into society and into this Hobbesian Goliath Leviathan thing if you don't have the arguments. So if you have these three first points and you avoid being unattractive for the majority, people will add up to you. They will go after you. They will keep coming to you because you do something right. You do something sympathetic. You fight for justice. You fight for climate. You fight for not just, my backyard, but something in general. And if you have this fourth point, then it's all about keeping yourself up, keeping the pressure up until a decision can be reached. And this is quite different from every campaign. I mean, every issue has its own decisions, but we can get into that. The most important thing about decisions is they have to have been done in public. So it is critical to really know these fine political structures, the way to address this decision. And then, in short, it's about teaching Goliath a lesson in democracy. It's not about force against force, it's about democracy in the end. And that is exactly what we did at our successful campaign against the Third Runway in Munich. And to talk about this picture and to give you some insight, I put here in the middle just the runway and the new terminal that they try to build for. And you see here this little village that is the community of Attaching, where I spent most of my time doing community building with these people from directly under the flight path. So planes will go like this. And what most people see when they think about it is, for example, this picture. It says Chor Dritte, meaning no third runway. And here's a date, the date where we made the Bürgerentscheid, the decision, the public decision. And we ask Munich, are you a city with a heart? So if you are that, then please vote against the third runway on this particular day. So this picture has happened in a very exciting, very demanding, and very carefully planned action. It was on the top of the Munich Central Hall. It was an action that was, of course, not allowed. So we went up there and did this without any permission and in full risk of, getting arrested by the police or getting serious issues with all kinds of law instructions afterwards. But the people who did this were mostly, I would say, between 60 and 70 years old. They are normal citizens. And because we carefully planned this, we created a picture for this very demanding and important Bürgerentscheid and gave the media what is called a media hook. So they can hook into this and put a picture on the main page of the newspapers, on the main screen of the media, on the first starting point of the governmental pages, of the news pages, and so on, and put our Bürgerentscheid once more into the public mind. But to see this in a context, we had this in 2012. And before that, we had 2005, the planning of the runway. We had local groups gathering together years before that. And we even have a historical background of protest for many, many years. So it is not uncommon, or I would say it's the normal, that you have many years, even decades of public campaigning with different groups, different actors, different people. Some are, all the time with it, some not so much. But over the years, we gathered about 80 local groups. We got more than 10 different institutions of the churches, like the local ones, the regional ones, some from the youth organizations of the both churches, Catholic and Protestant. Then we have all the environmental organizations behind it, and we also got the opposing parties of the government behind it. So all that took years to form and then to reach out to this decision. The main strategy behind it was keeping up the pressure, having the better arguments, and mobilizing for this one public decision. So it's very important to see the whole picture. We had old people, young people, we had this mass demonstrations, this direct actions or civil disobedience actions, all that played an important role. And this brings me to the next thing to address when we talk about David against Goliath. What is the most trapping about this kind of picture that you might have in mind when you do this campaigning is that there is only one David. And that is, of course, wrong. If you see yourself as one person or as a fighter for justice who is just alone, isolated, then you will do a big mistake. We have Christine Markgraf, or here Lucky, and all these people behind it. And this is just the first line of people who did the campaigning over the years and years and years, and who acted as a network, as different groups from different backgrounds, but all of them played important roles and worked together. So I think this is also something that is the most interesting about campaigning, that you will get together with people that you might never get together in a normal life, in this 9-to-5 life where you do your normal job. So this can be fun and this can be very interesting. And it is also very important to address that there are many Davids behind you, next to you, and to form this greater movement and get a majority behind you means, of course, that you have to have many, many, many people supporting you. And this will give your campaign many faces. So if you think about being David, you better think about being the Davids, or however you want to figure out this. We had a very similar strategy with the nuclear campaigning. And the nuclear campaigning in Germany took quite a long time until it was really peaking. Like from the 50s on, there were local protest groups in different cities and different spots, most important, Bühl at the beginning. And then here, for example, Weckersdorf is a Bavarian town where they tried to build a certain way of a certain nuclear station. And it just happened that Chernobyl reached out and that we had this peaking of public interest. And exactly at this time, it was the first time my parents left me alone. They went to the big public demonstrations at that time. And over the years, we had this ongoing governmental push for nuclear. And of course, over 20 years later, we were still struggling. I mean, people working together many, many, many years and forming local groups and having these all kind of ways of pushing it. And then we had our stop of the nuclear facilities in Germany, and our Chancellor Angela Merkel was elected, and she said, stop the stop. We'll just activate all the stuff again. So what we did was we said, okay, we have to put on the pressure. We have to go after this government, as no matter how, we don't know yet, but if we keep up the pressure from local groups, institutions, Green Party, environmental organizations, and so on, there will be an opportunity for us. We don't know yet, but we will go after it. And then it happened what everybody tried to avoid, what we all never wanted to happen, what was our greatest fear to happen. Another power plant exploded. This time it was Fukushima. And at that particular time, with the pressure behind it, there was an opportunity to change the decision-making in the German top government. It was Merkel who said, one cannot say it's safe any longer. And then came some months of thinking where we kept on pushing these mass organizations, these mass demonstrations, and it finally reached out to the stop of the stop of the stop, or the final end of the nuclear power plants in Germany. I still remember that we had 8 days to organize the first mass demonstration with about 40,000 people in Munich alone, right? I was head of this campaign, and it was like crazily demanding. And we had even bigger demonstrations in Berlin, in Hamburg, in Cologne, everywhere in Germany. And in these 8 days, things really changed. But it was only possible to go after this opportunity because we were ready. For all the time we had kept up the pressure, and we would be ready. And this brings me to some conclusions or some thinking about what is happening within the next years. We can discuss this later, but I think it's important to stress that the Paris Agreement has been signed by all the governments you might be governed by. I mean, all the European governments and the European Union signed this, and they will have to cut down carbon. They just will have to. And then the second thing is Corona is here to stay. I mean, no one wants it. I would be in Brussels much more likely, but the aviation will keep shrinking. Because even if we manage in Europe to get all European people vaccinated this year 2022, and we still have the other countries like Russia, Asia, Africa, Latin America, maybe even America, who will not be able to vaccinate their people. And this means that in 2023, 2024, maybe even 2025, aviation will have uncertainties. It will have pressure. It will even shrink. It will be the one infrastructure that might bring the next mutation. Keep that in mind. No politician ever wants to build a runway for the next Omicron, the next Delta, the next whatever. They don't want it. And no one will ask for them. So then really interesting question is, will there be enough pressure to take this opportunity, to go after what is most important, the public spending? If for the next years, protest in Europe against the aviation finds and makes every single euro they spend, they subsidize and they invest into aviation and make this transparent, this will cost the aviation industry 3 times, 4 times, 5 times this €1, right? I personally know a stewardess who lost their job and is now working as an office assistant. This woman is charming, intelligent, highly educated. She will never go back. She will keep on doing a different job. She's doing now environmental protection in a way. She's in the renewable energy business. And I think this will happen to many of their highly educated employees, the mechanics, the leading ones, those who invested their life into it and now get kicked out, they won't do it again. So when they have no people to invest. So the aviation is really shrinking and in a difficult situation. The question is, will there be enough pressure to go after decisions? Will you manage to go after the spend euro and say, okay, we need to invest this in schools. We don't need to invest it in a, I mean, it's ridiculous to say this, but just imagine that a gas station shop is not very much unattractive or attractive than an airport shop. It's, you get chocolate and some chunky magazines there, and it will be more or less the same within the next year or the next 2 years because it's really unattractive and it will be really boring to go there. So I think this industry is more or less at the brink of being forced into submission. But we can discuss this later, and I hope this gives you a little bit an hope and an insight. If not, just in case you hadn't had enough idealism yet, I would recommend you read some of the books of Saul Alinsky. If you have heard of him yet, it's great. If you haven't, I would suggest go after it, be curious, look in what he did. I mean, it was inspiring for the Obama campaigns and for many more campaigns that were highly successful. I don't talk too much about this. You will find it on your own. But it is more or less the same techniques, the same idea that also I stressed here. Have the better arguments, go after it, do some nice and very funny stuff to get the media attention, and be the sympathetic guy, be the one that the majority can say, yeah, what you do is justice, what you do is the environmental protection, what you do are the human rights, and we will add up to you, we will go after you, we will help you and support you, because what you do is just righteous. And that was what I had to say. Hope you enjoyed this little expertise on how to do campaigning. And I'm looking forward to discuss more detailed what actions we took, how we did what, how you can support each other, how you can figure out and organize. But I think John will have to say certain elements that are probably adding up to this. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Florian. This was a very inspiring presentation. Very, very interesting. And now the floor is to John. We will take questions after John's presentation.
Thank you, Dominique. I'm just getting my slides up. Great. Well, thank you, Dominique, and hello, everybody. It's good to see you here. That was a great presentation from Florian. And what's interesting is that some of the thoughts, many of the thoughts that Florian mentioned, will also be mentioned in my own presentation. But that was great stuff. Listen. Look at the picture on the left. Don't worry about the picture on the right. I was thinking of entitling this "How to Grow Old Badly Over 40 Years," but I decided that perhaps I should stick to the topic of the day and talk about campaigning. But essentially to highlight the fact that sad case that I am, I've been campaigning for about 40 years, mainly on transport issues, sometimes on noise issues. I started off campaigning locally for better public transport, walking and cycling. That's the picture on the left. I then headed up major campaigns in the 1980s and 1990s against huge road building schemes that were proposed in London and then across the UK. And then, of course, for 20 years, as Ella Vathira said, I chaired HACAN, which gave a voice to residents under the Heathrow flight paths. We were successful in stopping the third runway at Heathrow in 2010. It has come back again. It's not away for good. We don't quite know what will happen. But I'm going to draw on the experience of the third runway and draw on some of the experiences of the campaigns against roads to try and illustrate some of the key points on what I think make successful campaigning. I think I want to acknowledge there are one or two people on the call, I think, from Heathrow, particularly Armel Thomas, who has been a successful campaigner, fighting for the Heathrow villages, fighting for our homes that will not be, so they won't be destroyed by the third runway for many, many years. And she and others on the call were very much part of what I'm going to talk about. I think for aviation campaigners, there are probably three types of campaigns that we are involved in. One are the really big campaigns against a new airport, a new runway, or a new terminal. Secondly, there's campaigning about flight path changes, and that is very current. And as those of you who have been on webinars that Uecna have done over the last few months will know, there is real concern about new flight paths coming in. And the third area is just about the day-to-day growth, the kind of incremental growth at an airport. It's not dramatic, it's not sensational, but it's happening all the time. Now, they are in many ways different types of campaigns. And in a funny way, the more dramatic campaigns against a new airport, a new runway, or a new terminal are perhaps the easier ones to win. Because as Florian illustrated just now, there's something very dramatic to fight against. It's probably harder to fight the third point, which is the day-to-day growth, the incremental growth at an airport. But having said that, what I'm going to try and do is pick out lessons which I think to some extent or another are probably applicable to any of these 3 bullet points. And my lesson 1, and it's very similar to what Florian was saying, is to build a coalition of as wide a coalition as possible. The picture there is a group of people who, and very different people, who were brought together fighting the third runway at Heathrow. The coalition we described as that we brought together was probably the biggest and most diverse coalition ever assembled against a runway proposal in the UK. It included local residents, that's local residents living under the flight paths, local residents who's like Armel, whose homes would get demolished. It included local environmental groups, national environmental groups, some civil disobedience, direct action groups, as well as local authorities, some businesses, and some trade unions. So it was hugely diverse. And I chaired this group. Now, as Florian said, there were people in the group who in their day-to-day lives, if it hadn't been for the third runway, would never have met each other. They would never have drunk in the same pub together or even gone for a coffee together. So the first challenge in building up a group is to try and unify that group. People are coming with different perspectives, different interests, different backgrounds. And we may want to talk about this. It's a challenge. It's not easy. But what does make it easier, I think, is the second point there. Let's see and what unites us. And the one thing that united everybody in this coalition was opposition to a third runway at Heathrow. That was the thread that linked us all together. It was probably the only thread that linked us all together. But once the different individuals and groups in the coalition began to understand that they were stronger together, stronger as part of this thread fighting the third runway at Heathrow, then they realized that despite the differences, despite the diversity, we were stronger together than we were apart. But then I go on to the more positive side of a coalition. Yes, it's different. Yes, it's diverse. But that diversity can also be its strengths, because people coming from different backgrounds bring different things. People here, and there are many in the picture here, whose homes have been knocked down, but it's obvious what they bring. The sheer emotional pull that 800 and possibly more homes are going to be knocked down to make way for a third runway. There's residents under the flight paths. Many of them are experts in noise. Organizations like Friends of the Earth are experts in climate change and air pollution. So are Greenpeace. Greenpeace were also experts in giving us money, which was very nice indeed. Then some of the trade unions, we didn't have all the trade union support, but some of the trade unions, they brought a different perspective, as did, very importantly, businesses. Businesses were saying that, and particularly small and medium-sized businesses in West London, it was not in their interest to have a third runway, because as far as they were concerned, that would just enhance Heathrow and would draw workers and money away from them. So the diversity is a strength as well as a challenge. Now, you might ask, what if one particular group, say a particular local group, who also was opposed to a third runway, but didn't want to join, what do? Well, first of all, you do try and persuade them that it's in their interest to join. But there can be some groups which are very, what in English we would call NIMBY. They're simply interested in their own area. And I can think of an example, not so much from Heathrow, but when I was heading up the network of 250 local groups which opposed road building in London in the 1980s, there was a £13 billion programme to build new motorways and highways right across London. And there was one group who I've got to say were pretty well off and pretty well educated, and they kind of felt initially they could do it themselves. I remember sitting in the home of one of the campaigners who was a High Court judge, and they were all people of that sort. And they were saying, we can put enough pressure on the government because we have influence that we can stop the road coming through our area and put it to another area. As it was, that group decided to become part of us. And the one message we had in the road building program was anybody could join us as long as they said no new roads anywhere. They joined us. But if they hadn't joined us, that would have not been the end of the world. We were not going to compromise our principles of no new roads anywhere in order to accommodate one group. So if you can't get everybody, don't worry about it too much. If you've got the majority of people as part of a coalition, that I think is the essential first building block for success. Now I'm here talking about opposing a third runway. I think the same thing applies if we're fighting against flight path changes. Try, because they can be very divisive. Try and get people together. Try and get people united around a particular theme rather than fighting one community fighting each other over their flight paths. Let me go on quickly to the second lesson. Otherwise, I'll be talking all day. The second lesson, again, it reinforces something what Florian was saying, is we want to, as campaigners, set the agenda. Florian's absolutely right that we need to know what the political structure is. We need to know when the public consultation takes place, when the public inquiry takes place. But we should not allow that framework to dominate our campaigning. We should set our own framework and set our own agenda. When I was campaigning against the roads in the 1980s and the 1990s, one of our slogans was, win before the public inquiry. The public, yes, go to the public inquiry. Yes, if it takes place, yes, take part in the consultations, of course. But the way to set the agenda is for us to have demonstrations, as Florian said, with a hook for the media, to have our demonstrations, to publish our reports, to get our information out, again, critical, in our own way, in our own time, so that the other side is responding to us. We are not always responding to them and their agenda. The example there is the day Terminal 5 opened at Heathrow. It was 1980 to 2007, and it was in the middle of our campaign against the third runway. Now, we thought Terminal 5 opening, that is going to be a huge, good news story for the airport. What can we do about it? So in the morning, it was due to open at lunchtime. In the morning, we went out and did a flash mob, which you see there, in the terminal, completely peaceful. We didn't disrupt anything really. But the point was that the picture the next day was not of a new terminal. That's their agenda. The picture the next day was what you see here, was a flash mob made up of a whole diverse range of people. We had seized the agenda. We hadn't worked towards somebody else's agenda. Now, the second point here, don't worry about it too much when I say never go on holiday. I don't mean it, none of us should ever go on holiday. It comes back to your point, Florian, about lots of Davids. If there was just one David, he or she would be struggling. But I think what I mean by this is there are times when the governments go on holiday. People who are paid professionals in the aviation industry go on holiday. In the UK, it's in August. There's also public holidays. Now think about it. If as it were, the other side is on holiday, that is the time when you have got the media to yourselves, when we can get our press releases out, and the chances are there won't be a reply from the other side. So at least somebody in your group on any particular public holiday should make sure that they are not on holiday that day. Get your press release out for the public holiday, and I think you'll find the media love you and will be interviewed by you because they've got no other stories that day. It's part of it's an example of us setting the agenda. One other thing before I finish this lesson 2, some of the other lessons will be shorter, I think, is by setting the agenda, we feel empowered. If you're simply responding always to somebody else's agenda, that can be really quite tiring and disempowering. If you're setting the agenda, if you're putting the other side on the back foot, it can be very empowering for yourselves and your group. Now, just wait till I click this properly. My third lesson is don't be afraid of civil disobedience. Now, it may be in certain campaigns, civil disobedience, or as we tend to call it in the UK, direct action, it may not be necessary in all campaigns. So don't do it if it's not necessary. But think about this, civil disobedience, and by this I mean peaceful civil disobedience. I think once violence is concerned, it's a different ballgame altogether. But civil disobedience is the ultimate way of us setting our agenda. It's the ultimate thing that the powers that be find great difficulty in responding to. And the pictures here I've chosen deliberately. On the last day of the official consultation into a third runway at Heathrow, we responded to the consultation, but we just didn't want just to respond and send in some pieces of paper. Nobody would know we had done it. So on the 2 days before the end of the consultation, we held a rally, which you see here, one of the largest rallies ever held, thousands of people in central London, with leading politicians and campaigners speaking. But one of those speakers came from an organization called Plain Stupid, which was a direct action organization. And 2 days later, the young man who spoke at the rally from Plain Stupid, called Leo Murray, was one of the people who was on the roof of the House of Commons hanging down those banners. Now, the interesting thing here is, I think if we are talking about civil disobedience or direct action, it works most effectively when it's linked to the wider campaign. Now, that's not to say that everybody in the wider campaign would take direct action or even approve of direct action. That doesn't matter too much. But as long as the direct action is part of the wider campaign, as it was here, that strengthens our campaign, because the powers that be really don't quite know. They get worried. They don't quite know how many ordinary people will take direct action. Florian's example of Munich, where the people who hung the banner there were aged between 60 and 70. Now that really frightens the authorities. That frightens the authorities much, much more than if you're between 16 and 26. So you may not need to take direct action in your campaign. Don't do it if you don't need to. but don't be afraid of it as long as it's peaceful. Again, as already been said, don't forget about the economics. As local campaigners, as campaigners on noise and environment, we are very good at highlighting the impact on the noise, on climate change, on air pollution, on green spaces. That's what we know about. Very often we tend to be a little bit frightened about the economics. We think, oh, well, we don't understand that. But most large schemes, indeed some of the airspace change schemes, the growth at the airports, the day-by-day growth, they are all justified on economic grounds. So in my view, unless you are including the economics, you are fighting your battle with one arm behind your back. And when we were fighting the third runway at Heathrow, we commissioned, and it cost a lot of money, it cost about £40,000. We commissioned independent consultants from the Netherlands called CE Delft to do a report challenging the fact that a third runway was essential to the economy of London. Not that Heathrow was damaged the economy of London, because clearly it brings some benefits. But the third runway was not essential for the economy to survive. That report we launched in the City of London, in the financial area, and that report was hugely influential in convincing the Conservative Party, the traditional party of business, who were in opposition at the time, that they could safely come out against the third runway. So don't forget the economics. Let me go on, otherwise I'll go on forever. Lesson number 5 is proposed solutions. You can see what the solution here is, that we were saying for short-haul flights, it's easier to go by train. And what we actually did to highlight this, we had a race where one person, Sarah Clayton here, who runs Airport Watch in the UK, she went by Eurostar, because we had a race from Big Ben in London to the Eiffel Tower in Paris. It was very catchy, the media followed it. I've got to say, although I'd worked out beforehand that the train should beat the plane, that day, if there's a God in the sky, he was a train driver, not a pilot, because the plane was held up both leaving Heathrow and arriving at Charles de Gaulle. And by the time the plane people arrived at the Eiffel Tower, Sarah was on her way back in Eurostar, drinking a celebratory glass of wine. I highlight an example. Let's have our solutions. The solutions may be rail rather than plane for short-haul flights. The solutions may be some technical solutions. There are people in our campaign and in Uecna who have got particularly around flight paths and noise. Sometimes we need to put forward the technical solutions, so that they're not always exciting, dramatic solutions like sending Sarah to Paris. It can be the very detailed solutions of getting our technical arguments right, challenging the other side on technical arguments regarding noise, regarding flight paths, regarding air pollution. So from the dramatic to the more behind the scenes stuff, whatever it is, we should be prepared, we should have our solutions. Lesson 6 is, and this is something that came from the last 10 years. Sometimes the airport will want to talk to you, because sometimes the airport is beginning to change. Sometimes the airport is feeling it's under some pressure. And certainly what happened over the last 10 years at Heathrow is that Heathrow had lost its battle for a third runway in 2010. It realized it was going to lose its battle for third runway forever and a day unless it made some concessions to local communities. That was a result, I think, of our collective campaign. But if they're serious, and they may not always be serious, but if they're serious in putting out feelers that they want to talk to us about serious issues, then we've got to realize, do we respond? And this can be the hardest thing of all for many of us campaigners who are very used to having one clear enemy. It's black and white, it's not complex. But if the airport is beginning to change a bit, whether it's over flight paths or anything else, it becomes more complex, it becomes more multicolored, and it's a decision that one has to take as to what extent one talks and when it is right to talk and when it's not right to talk. I don't think anybody can ever get it right, but it is something that I think we have to boldly, bravely, and realistically face up to. Finally, I didn't know Florian was going to show the picture, and he didn't know what I was going to show. But there's the picture, and you can see, can't you, the similarity between what Florian's pensioners did in Germany and what plain stupid youngsters did in London when they went up Big Ben and hang down a banner. And I think this is the value of days like today. This is the value of the kind of webinars that Uecna is putting on, that we can learn from each other. We can learn from each other on how to do stunts. We can learn from each other about arguments and about techniques and about technical things. But the more we learn from each other, the more we work together, the stronger we will be. And finally, and these slides will be available to people, and this part of the meeting has also been recorded. Those are the two key, if you want more information, probably these are the two key booklets which I've written. They're short books. Some of you will be familiar with Victory Against All the Odds. It's an account of the successful battle against the third runway, which ended in 2010, and I know it's been translated into German, French, and I think Dutch. The other one is more recent, and in some ways, I think it's quite interesting. It's how Heathrow changed over the last 10 years. They're still a major airport. They still want a third runway, but they are talking with and prepared to make concessions to communities that they would never have done when I wrote the first booklet, Victory Against All the Odds. That's it for me, Dominic, and we look forward to good questions and discussion.
Thanks a lot, John. Very inspiring as well. I like your presentation. I learned a lot from the two presentation with Florian and with you. And maybe you have questions. And yeah, I see a raised hand already. Armel, do you want to? And yes, so if you want to speak, your name was given by John.
That's before Armel comes in. Can I just say, Armel is one of the heroines of the third runway campaign and has been fighting it. I think, Armel, probably even longer than I have. So it's good to have you here.
Your microphone
you're on mute.
Is not on.
Can hear you, Armel.
Armel, you're still on mute.
It's at the bottom on your left.
A bit, Armel, what we're going to do, you will let you a little time to find your button, and Jürgen wants to speak, and then you'll come again, Armel, okay? Jürgen, do you want to say something?
To both John and Florian, the group or groups, does that change in composition over time? Are there lost souls who leave the group? What do you do with them? Thank you.
I didn't quite hear that, Dominic. Jürgen, do you want to just say that again? I didn't quite hear everything you said there.
I was wondering whether the group always stays together during a year-long campaign, or are there people who are leaving, and what are you doing about these lost souls, if you like?
Can I maybe take that, and Florian may want to come in as well. I think that's a really, really good point, Jürgen, because when campaigns are very short, you know, if they're 6 months or maybe less than a year, then I think people will stay together, particularly local people will have the energy to carry on campaigning. But your point is so interesting, because I think if it's a longer campaign, local people will not necessarily stay in the campaign all the time. If, for example, we were saying to people, well, the third runway will be built in 10 years' time, most local people can't campaign and live their own lives and look after their families and go to work for 10 years. And sometimes 10 years seems a long way away. They think, well, I may have moved by then. So I think my feeling is that local people will move out of a campaign if it lasts longer than a year. We probably have to accept that, but I think we have to be also alert to picking the right time and saying to people, look, it's urgent again. Can you come and help us? But you're absolutely right. It's one of the biggest problems we actually face.
Florian, you want to add something on this, about this?
Yes. The question is not easy to answer, because it depends really about the motives for people to leave. For example, I can imagine people saying, hey, you can call me anytime, I'll be there, but I'll have to do this and that now. Or I can imagine someone saying, I'm frustrated because I didn't get the chair. I'm not the one face, right? So these are two very different questions. But the lost soul, I think, will always be able to come back. This is the most important. If you give them a job, a role, something, once they come back, then they will come back if they are needed. So don't hesitate too much about getting people together. Be open for new people, be open for change, and have a core team, maybe even some professionals, right? Someone who's leading a party, someone who's a full-time politician, who has a secretary or an assistant. And maybe someone like this can do this year-long jobs, right? This demanding things that it's too much to ask a normal private person to dedicate every week 10 hours for writing press releases. But maybe there is someone in the alliance who can do that, who does this anyway on a professional basis. So it's very much about splitting up those different tasks to different people, and then probably the lost souls will be all there once you need them. They will come back.
Thank you, Florian. Let's Armel ask a question, because I think you managed to unmute.
Right. Thank you very much indeed, and welcome everybody. And thank you for being part of this discussion. I found Florian's speech very, very uplifting, and it was interesting to see how he was fighting. To John, there were a few things that I wanted to mention. In the picture, quite a few of the people that's the people who were fighting the runway, and we were by the church in Harmondsworth. Some people have died knowing that their loved one would lose their home and their communities. And this is something we cannot forgive Heathrow. I lost my husband in the process in the space of 8 weeks. What John did not mention is at that time, under this, what I call the third runway in Simpson, we had a wonderful priest, Father Phil, who was actually paid by Heathrow, but was part of our community and used to give us a lot of speeches on the green, fighting the third runway. which I think, John, you probably appreciate. The funny thing, and I was looking to actually see if he was there, but I don't think he was there on that day.
No.
The other picture that you used, I'm afraid, was the wrong one. You should have used the one when we had the ladies who actually had bared their chest in Terminal 5 on the floor of Terminal 5, and I'm sure that you were part of that as well. And that was also what we called a flash mob, and it was very funny.
But this is a family show. This is a family show, there, Armel.
Oh, really? All right. Well, yeah. Sorry, it's before the 9 o'clock threshold. Fine. Okay, I take the point. But I think what is very important to remember, and thank you, John, for my campaigning. I started campaigning in 1993, and writing to the chief executive, who at the time was Sir John Egan. And I was part of the 4-year inquiry when we were telling everybody we didn't want the third runway. And even, John Egan said it would never happen. And I've got letters in here written, by him. We were part of the inquiry, and the judge actually said at the time, well, I'm giving you permission to have the Terminal 5 because the third runway would not happen. Actually, when the third runway in Harmondsworth then came back, which we've been fighting since 2012, he actually said that had he known, and he should have known, he would have never allowed Terminal 5 to be built. So it's unfortunate that people actually accepted our arguments once the argument had been lost. And David Cameron, who in 2010 wanted to be the Conservative candidate for Prime Minister, who was then in the opposition, actually said no ifs, no buts, weeks before being elected, and then chose the Davis Commission, John Davis, to actually lead the third runway, and he was working really on the side for Heathrow Airport, or for a company working for Heathrow Airport. So we never had a chance at all. And I just wanted to say to everybody today, we are still on death row. We are still fighting the third runway. John Holland-Kay, the chief executive, has said it's on pause. It looks like it's on pause for the next 10 years. We have regular meeting with Heathrow Airport, and all we get is empathy and sympathy. And we understand where you are. But the fact is, we are still where we were in 2001 with the runway against Simpson, which John quite rightly said we defeated in 2010. But we never really defeated it. It was on pause. And, we have now, I'm 75 and I'm expected to wait until I'm 85 to find out whether I'm going to be bulldozed or not. And I'm really saying that to people around the world, because Heathrow is the second biggest polluter in the world, although it is not the second biggest airport anymore. Dubai is the first biggest polluter. And the difference as well with Europe, which I think people may not realize, is that most of the airport and the airline in Europe belong to the taxpayer. And the taxpayer has got a huge voice. In the UK, Margaret Thatcher came, and although she was a great prime minister, she actually privatized everything with a B. British Airways, British Leyland, British Telecom, the BBC, and BAA. And when Charles de Gaulle was open, France was able to say to the airline, Air France, you will go to Charles de Gaulle, because the taxpayer owned the airport and the airline. Now, when we actually built Stansted in the UK, Stansted was actually the equivalent to Charles de Gaulle, because they were away from London and from the main population. But the government could not say anything because the airline, British Airways, had been privatized. And Heathrow or BAA or LHR or HAL, as they are called, and they've changed all their name time and time again, but they're always the same people. They actually didn't have to force anybody to go to Stansted either. So we are having the same problem. We've got probably 8 or 9 million people being overflown. We have 15,000 people who will possibly lose their home in the next 5 or 10 years. So we are in a very, very special situation. And Heathrow is still buying properties and is still destroying our communities and the fabric of our community. So we are in a very special space. So thank you very much indeed for highlighting, let me sort of highlight all those problems. But the main thing really about aviation, and I finish there, is demand management. It is not actually offsetting, planting trees and flying more. It's actually cutting down on the number of people who fly and the frequent flyer. And at the moment, they are only sort of having demand management because of COVID. So I think
sorry,
we
Armel.
need to fight that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Armel. It is true, and you're right to show that there's still a lot to do, and everything is not finished. Any? Do you want to say a word, John, or no?
I'm fine.
Then we have a question from Willem now. Florian, sorry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just very, very short answer to that. I understand this. This is what John also said in the third bullet point, this cancerous growth of aviation, that everyday growth that they grab into their communities, and they grab the land, and they do that. And they will continue doing this. Exception is only to be reached by pressure. By pressuring on the money that is spent now and next year and the following years, the public money. I mean, the aviation here in Germany, it was the one company that got the most out of this COVID. They got the money so much, and this is simple because it's necessary. They can't sustain themselves. This infrastructure can't sustain itself unless you push in public money. And that is, I think, the most important thing to address within the next years, to go after the public money and to make every single penny transparent, and to bring it into public minds that this is not going into the hospitals and into the nurses that we need now. This is going into an infrastructure that is outdated. I mean, if you want to have a solution for infrastructure, this is it. Everybody has it. We're doing it right now. We're talking over the internet, and this is what progress looks like. The aviation isn't progress anymore. It's like, I'm stopping myself now and come back to questions, but I see this point, and the only way to reach this is with exactly the same problem we have with the nuclear stuff. It was an outdated technology. It's not the solution. It costs public money, and it will cost public money, and it is unsustainable. It can't reach anything from its own point. So the only way is to keep up the pressure and wait for an opportunity, and then be able to really go after that.
Yes, thank you, Florian. Then we'll take the next question from Willem.
Thank you, Dominique. I will bring the discussion a bit back to really the core business of campaigning, because what I'm noticing here is people convincing other people that are already convinced. I had a question in particular to Florian, because he's younger than me. He didn't use the word internet, and nor did John. Now, John is excused because he is sort of the same age as I am, but I think that the internet is one of the most important new developments also in the campaigning business. Can you elaborate a bit more on how internet should be used in a campaign?
Yes. The internet is most important. It's like the one media that is leading, right? The other medias will follow what the internet says, the newspapers, the radio and stuff. So it's important to generate certain numbers within this certain growth numbers for leading and showing here is an interest. For example, we did a YouTube video. It's just one camera sitting there and we are acting, and there's no cutting, no extra noise, no extra anything, no music. We just took a ghetto blaster and put it next to the camera. It's the most easy way of doing this, right? But it was funny. We had our arguments within it. We had our fun. We were convincing. And this video was clicked and clicked and clicked and clicked. It was the one video that just went through skyrocketing. And this shows to the other medias that here is an issue to follow, right? It sets your own agenda. It sets your own point. It's something that you did with that is creative, and it also communicates to the following media. So this is important. But things have changed a little bit, and especially the social media like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, they are full of negativity and hatred. Years before, this wasn't so much the case. Now it is something that you have to keep in mind and that you be able to address right? There will be people in this media just for no sake at all, just randomly pushing you, criticizing you, whatever, threatening you. And you have to have an idea of getting rid of this, right? Just downvote them, get them out of it. Don't just ignore them. But you have to have this in mind, unfortunately. So the media, especially the social media, I would say 5 years ago, they were really a gift. Now they are like a two-sorted, something that you have to figure out. But it can be a very powerful tool, and it is, of course, the one thing that you can always do, and that will feed into the other medias. And if you feel uncomfortable with it, just ask the younger people to do it. I mean, they want to do something, right? If you have grandchildren or children or a class or a youth organization, pathfinders, whoever, they want to participate. They want to have a task, right? But they are probably not so good in reading newspapers and answering to newspapers and doing press releases, but they might be very good in doing the social media. So just give it to them, trust them. They will do what they can and they will do it good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Florian. Bertold, you're next.
Yes, thank you, John. I think you have shown 3 aims for campaigns. I think you should add as 4th aim the target for night flight bans.
Yeah.
And I have an example of a successful campaign against night flights in Brandenburg, the state of Berlin-Brandenburg, the terrific new airport. There was a petition for a referendum for night flight bans from 22 to 6 o'clock. It was successful. The state parliament accepted the petition, and so no referendum was done. But unfortunately, we have until now not a night flight ban. But I think this is a theme we should address.
I agree. And as we were saying this morning a bit, Bertold, I think this is one of those issues, one of those threads which unites people all over Europe, in fact, all over the world. Whatever their differences as campaigners, most people don't want night flights. I think you're right, there's real potential there.
Michael Flosheimer.
Yeah. I think in every fight, it's necessary to find out what is the weakest part of the change in the counterpart. And one thing was already said, you and John and Bertold, that means night flights banning But the other thing is, in my opinion, is the short-haul flights, because that's something that many people in society think it's not necessary. And it's to ban short-haul flights weaks the aviation system, yeah, because it shows something could happen that is not necessary. Something there's a point of degrowth. For instance, just a word to the anti-nuclear movement in Germany. It was not only abstract pressure. We had already had a moratorium since 1886, but then the weakest part of the chain was looking for a stock for the waste. And this was the campaign in Gorleben. Whenever there come nuclear waste from Britain, from Scotland or somewhere else, there were big demonstrations, and they were with civil, I don't know, civil ungehorsam. Yeah, and this was the link between the de facto moratorium and the political decision to stop it, including the catastrophes of at the beginning Chernobyl, at the end Fukushima. And therefore, we tried in Germany we started a campaign in July against short-haul flights. We made a simple, as all in the spirit of what John said, we made a simple declaration, and we found with only one sentence, it says it's not addressed to any special party, to any special person. It's just addressed in the public ban short-haul flights, and we find supportings of 60 groups in 15 airports in Germany together. Yeah, and we still do it. Yeah, it's for a long time, and for Florence, he knows it because you have signed it. I know, not you special, but your organization, and. So we use the last sentence to find the weakest part of the chain. This is very, very necessary.
I agree with this, and I think the campaign on short-haul flights is something that we can try and get right across all the countries in Europe and perhaps beyond, because with short-haul flights there are solutions. I mean, with long-haul flights, that is probably what aviation is meant to be doing. Aviation's role is to take people long distances, but actually for short-haul flights there are alternatives, and particularly if trains were efficient and reasonably well and cheap, there are alternatives. So I agree that as you say, that's a weakest link. That's a strong point for us, and something which I think we can all unite around. Very much agree.
Thank you. Walter, sitting next to me.
Okay. I want to add one aspect we haven't heard yet. That's the juridical aspects, which have possibilities to succeed. In the Netherlands, Shell, the oil company, was sued, and with success. And they have to reduce their emissions, and not only their own emissions, but also from their clients. So that will be a bit difficult, but I think aircraft need some products of Shell. Another aspect is the nitrogen oxide problem in the Netherlands. It's not possible to build new houses and new roads at the moment in a lot of areas in the Netherlands because of too much emissions on that kind. That's about cattle, pigs and cows, but part is from the aviation too. And the third aspect is you should look if it's possible to find some of the exceptions that aviation has and shoot that, because every company in the Netherlands should have a permit, a nature permit, to not polluting the environment too much. But there was an exception for aircraft for Schiphol Airport. And this week, the government has a little problem because the judge has said that Schiphol should have a permit. So at this moment, the number of flight movements, which are 500,000 max, must go back to 400,000, and that's a 20% reduction. Well, the fact that the government is talking about this is already a success. So sometimes there are possibilities you might have not thought about.
Sorry. Thank you, Walter. Yes, this is a good success for.
Please, John.
No, you go on, Florian. You go on.
I just wanted to say that your restrictional ways are very effective if they are on your agenda. So if you do if you bring them to court on your terms, then it might work out. If you have to do what we did, right? If they have a third runway and they want to go for it, the court won't stop it. I mean, there is, I can't even think of it. It is obvious that your restrictional things, they can be working if you have the case, but if they have the case, then it's just a question of how they will manage to get through this. And what we did with this particular situation where we knew we would lose, where we knew that this will be a drawback, is that we all, when the sentence was said, when it was said, here it is legal to build it, we've proved it, we weighted it, we looked at all the details, and in the end, it's so important for everybody that we have this third runway, is don't accept it. At least not emotionally, at least not morally. Don't let them have the final word. Don't let the court be the final word. Let democracy speak. So what we did was, when the judge stood there and read down the decision, everybody stood up. Everybody stood up, about 200 people, and we started singing the Bavarian anthem, right? To show that our identity, our way of seeing things is not broken. And that, again, that took away the headlines from the third runway is allowed to build to, in the courtroom, people stand up singing the Bavarian anthem to show their opposition to what the court says. And what this meant, of course, is morally, on the traditional way of seeing things, we are the winners. We don't take this decision and say, now it's fine for us. So if the decision is fine for you, go after it. If it's not fine for you, don't accept it. I mean, it's legally right, but it's not morally right. And you can go after the moral things as well.
Thank you for your comment. Your presentation was very helpful. We're going to use it in the Netherlands.
If you need me, that is something I wanted to say anyway. If you need me, we can have a session like this somewhere within your group, get together, have an hour of talk or whatever. We can terminate this. It's not, I'm open to any kind of help that I can provide.
Thank you very much for that invitation.
Yes, thank you. Be careful, because you may be overwhelmed by the demands, by the request. Arlene, you had, unless sorry, Arlene, before you speak, John, did you have something?
No, I'm
Arlene,
fine.
Arlene, it's your turn then, and welcome
right.
to Europe.
Yes, and it's an early hour here in the US. So let me thank both speakers, and of course, a special hug to my friend John, because we've been together in this for a long time. But one thing that had not been stressed today, and I will stress it and then link it to economy, to dollars. Yes, Florian is correct. The name of the game is money. It's the adverse effects of noise and air pollution on the lives of those people who are exposed to the overhead jets that they have to tolerate and deal with all the time, less during the pandemic. My daughter, who lives with overhead flights, was able to hear birds singing, and she was able to see the beautiful birds. But those are serious impacts. They affect health. So let's get to money. And by the way, as John knows, I've published papers on the adverse effects of noise and air pollution on health and well-being. Let's talk about dollars. In the US, except for the military, medical costs are very high. And when you find that people that live with aircraft noise and air pollution have increased risks for cardiovascular disorders and other physical disorders and mental disorders. Depression is now being talked about in terms of the effects of noise on mental health. My work was on the effects of, in this case, train noise, but it's also aircraft noise on children's learning. So let's take health. If you have increased risk because of the pollution of planes on health, that's called dollars. And who's paying for it? The taxpayers. When my studies were shown that children's learning was impacted by rail noise, and then later studies aircraft noise, when children are a year behind in learning by the 6th grade, and they have to have remediation, you know what that's called? It's called dollars. So let's not forget in our discussion, and by the way, I am an activist, as John knows, in the United States. And John, I've been an activist longer than you have, because I was involved in the anti-Vietnam War in 1968 and those demonstrations. So
Wait, you don't look that old, huh?
So please, yes, speak about the dollars, but realize those dollars are being spent on health treatments because of the deleterious impacts of aircraft noise and air pollution on well-being. And while the airlines like to make money, the government is spending on those medical bills, and that's costing dollars. So thank you to both of you. It was a pleasure. And of course, I got up at 7 a.m. so I could be on this. And I see a friend, one other friend of mine from the US, Elaine, is on also. So thanks to all of you.
Well, thank you, Arlene, to wake up early for us and listen to John and Florian and share also your experience with us. We always appreciate your input. And I know that you've been following some of our webinars. So, I'm very happy that you're there. I think Elaine may be around as well today. It's very good that we have this contact with you, with your groups in the US, and we maintain that. And we were talking earlier this morning about a global cooperation between groups of citizens against airports, and that is the beginning maybe of that. And campaigning may take another turn in the next years if we managed to act together at even a higher level than Europe or States or United States, and more global and in ICAO.
Thank you.
And just to say, Arlene, well, I hope you're having a nice breakfast, first of all. But secondly, you are right about costs, about dollars. And, in Britain and probably most countries in the Western world, smoking in public places is now banned. It wasn't just a few years ago. And in my view, the main reason it was banned is because it was costing the health. The health of the people was costing the countries too much. That was the reason it was banned. And you're absolutely right. Follow the money. Yeah.
Thank you.
About this cost, well, we're not campaigning any longer, but we have to come back to campaigning, but cost. There's this European study with 33 airports saying social cost of aviation amount to $33 billion every year. And for France, we had a similar study saying that admitting that social costs of aviation in France amounted to 6 billion euros every year. Any Eleftheria, if you want to take the floor.
Yes, Dominique, I have to say two things. The one is a question, and the other is a matter to raise. Willem talked about it earlier. The question is, how do you convince the media to publish what you have to say if they are paid from an airport lobbyist to do otherwise? And the other thing is that taking governments or airports to court cost. How do you support this this task if you don't have any funds?
They're excellent questions. The media can be a real problem, particularly in situations where, as you described, they're very close to the airport. They may be paid by the airport. I think, though, it does come back to what we do to some extent, because the media are interested in stories to publish, in good stories. Now, if they're very close to the airport, it's harder for us, but I don't think it's impossible, because if we can give them a good story, then they will cover it. For example, Florian's 60 to 70-year-olds climbing up the tower and hanging the banner. That was a good story. Now, I'm not suggesting you go out and do that the minute you get back to Athens. But
someone is hearing, so you better take it.
Someone's listening. Yeah. But the example I gave of our flash mob in Terminal 5, that was such a good story. Even the media, who might be quite close to the airport, couldn't resist. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to do this, because it's not easy. It can be really, really quite difficult. But if you can think of something that is almost irresistible to the media to cover, then you're beginning to get it. The other thing that media will do, certainly the serious papers, and something people were saying earlier, if you have really good arguments, they may well publish them. Now, again, it's not easy, but it's worth it. But it's worth. But I don't think it's impossible. Now, your other question was about. Just remind me.
About funding. If you want to go to court, you have
answer. It can be very difficult to fund, and particularly for smaller groups. I mean, the campaigns that I think Florian and I were both talking about were quite large campaigns, and that's why in some ways it's easier to raise funding to oppose something very big like a new runway or what have you. It's much harder on the day-to-day opposition of growth at airports.
Martin may have an answer for that.
I think
yes,
Martin
for the funding. Funding has two sides. One side is the funding of the campaign and for a special target. And the other side is funding, and this was the question of Eleftheria, I think, how to finance any fight at court. And when we had the announcement of Lufthansa 23 years ago now, that they wanted to have another runway in Frankfurt, a fourth runway, we made a separate organization to collect money for legal fight. That means for lawyers and all this, what we would need for this fight, for long-term fight. This organization had at the best times 300 to 400 people, members, who paid every month €5. So we had collected more than 100,000 euros to be able to support private people for any legal activity that they have against this, because only the private person could fight against, because it has a legal right to do this. This organization is a separate organization that was always going on, and we collected quite a lot of money, and we needed less than expected in 22 years, but we still have this budget there, and it's now reduced. A number of people have left this organization. We don't take any more €5 a month. We take now 5 per quarter, so it's €20 a year, but we still keep this running, and we still have a budget. I tell this because I'm chairing as well this organization for some years now, because they asked me to do this, but it's not because I'm a specialist on this, but we still have a fund for legal fights. And this is very helpful if you have always this background to finance your lawyers.
Thank you, Martin. So I think that's a good answer. Arlene, your hand is raised. Sorry.
Yes.
Oh, excuse me, Arlene. Someone.
No, it was me. It was me. Just to point out that Arlene's hand was raised. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
Do you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, now we're living in the 21st century. And I must say, I've had great success with the media and the press. And I have been able to get my research in the New York Times, on the 3rd page of the New York Times, and the effects of noise on people's health. But this is the 21st century. We don't have to rely as we readily did in the past. And that's not just because 3 of my grandchildren are so media savvy, including one who works for Google. So they keep me abreast of what's going on. We have podcasts now. We are able to interact with each other in a way that we could not. We don't have to depend on the traditional media, which I still depend on. I'm still very close to people in the press and people, on the air. But we can reach so many people through the proper use of the media. In fact, one of our groups in the US is working on aircraft noise, and we're trying to organize people across the country. So we have all these different groups, but they needed someone to come up with a way of reaching these people and dialoguing with them. And they asked my 15-year-old grandson to set up the program so they can interact with each other. So my 15-year-old grandson is now using his skills, his tech skills, and he's in contact with people at Apple, his tech skills, so that the people in the US can have the groups across the country interact. And if you want to get something on that deals with noise, you can now use your own tech, and you're going to reach people across the world with your knowledge. So yes, I do love the traditional press. I have the paper version of the New York Times and delivered to my house every day. But get into the 21st century, get the tech savvy young people that know more than I do. I may be a little more savvy, but I'm relying on their knowledge. And let's promote ourselves in a way we could not do 10 years ago.
Exactly. I think this is very true, and I see how we exchange ideas, and how we can communicate with people now with all these Telegram and Signal and Twitter and whatever, Facebook, and it's really impressive how we look on Twitter. I mean, it's fantastic. We're exchanging a lot. We can even address, ask politicians. They are also on Twitter. You just need to put their names on your tweet, and they will be. They will have to read. Well, they will surely take knowledge of what you're saying about them, because they are very. It's very important what people say about politicians, It's their image, their reputation. So we can use that as well. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, just
Okay.
one more quick answer
yes,
to this
Florian.
media thing. If you have a newspaper that is really not in your favor, don't waste your time on it. Just don't. I mean,
Okay.
look after other newspapers, other journalists, and even think about different things like the radio. It's really underestimated, or podcasts, or maybe even TV. Why not? There are interesting people out there doing media, and they will sympathize with what you have to say if you have the better arguments, and if you have if you're doing it for the greater good, if you're doing it for human rights, if you're doing it for the environment, they will be interested in you. So don't waste your time on someone blocking you. Just go around and search a little bit wider, and you will find people, and then pressure will come. And if there's pressure, the other newspapers will have to deal with it. They will have to follow. They don't want to lose a case, right? They will have to do a two-sided article or whatever if it's too big an issue.
Thank you, Florian. Elena, you wanted to add something?
Yes, maybe there should be a suggestion, taking up what Arlene said. Maybe we should build the chain network to spread around the word about the stories or about the actions we make. And we do it globally in order to transfer around the news.
Yes.
And I think Uecna should have to play a role in this.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Great idea, Elif.
If there's no more comments, I would like to thank all the people here today. This is the end of this webinar. Thank you especially to John and Florian, who have been our speakers today. You had really inspiring words for us, and surely we will use everything you said today for our future campaigns.